So when I first thought about the big stories of the week, the thing I had at the top of my list, not just because his name starts with an A, it was Ronald Acuna. And I guess I want to ask you, do you think the Ronald Acuna injury dooms the Braves' chances?
I think it certainly dooms. I think is tough to say because there's always a chance that a team as talented as that goes on a run and can still get it done. But
Like the Braves in 2021 without Ronald Acuna?
Right. But that was a run. What I mean is
They won the World Series.
No. But what I'm saying is that felt like a very magical run for that team.
Yeah,
I
see.
A lot of guys got really hot, and they got performances from people, especially in that postseason, that you don't normally expect to get out of them. And so I think what the Acuna does is it moves them from being contenders in the sense of being somebody you can reasonably expect based on, like, if the team just performs how I expect it to, they're a World Series contender. They were in that status with the Phillies, with the Dodgers, with the Yankees and the Orioles. Like, that's kind of how they were. Without Acuna, I think they're more in the second group with, like, teams like the Mariners and the Guardians.
That's
where it's
fair.
like, okay, if everything goes right for them, they could still win the World Series, but it's not as likely. And considering that guys aren't hitting the same way that they were last year in that lineup,
Says Matt Olson.
you're right. There has to be a little bit of worry in Atlanta now that you're like, oh, we might be looking at what for them is going to be an unfortunate fate, which is a postseason exit.
Right. I guess the reason I said that in the context of does it doom their chances, they've already trying to survive Spencer Strider being out for the year. And
Right.
you already pointed out that, the hitting hasn't been there, and it's kind of remarkable. And look, Acuna is such an amazing player, and coming off an MVP season where he stole 70 and had 40 home runs, a lot of people, not me, picked him for the MVP for this year. I think it might have been you.
I might have done that.
But it's just bad for baseball when you got an exciting player like that. And
No, it's never good for baseball when an exciting top player misses another gigantic part of a season with a season-ending injury. So it's just unfortunate, even if, we as Met fans are never upset about the Brave chances being lessened just a bit.
Shh. But something that people would say is a positive is addition by subtraction, and that is that Angel Hernandez finally will no longer umpire Major League Baseball games.
Right, we are free of Angel Hernandez, who was much maligned as pretty definitively, at least by the statistics, the worst umpire in the Major
Well,
League.
you had talked about that in another podcast where, like, he wasn't the worst. But it was bad.
It was bad. Like, he was consistently near the bottom, and I think he was like the bottom 5, and he also had what was generally like I think he still holds the worst performance in a single game.
I think you're right.
So
33 years as a Major League umpire.
Now here's what's going to be. So who's next? Because
who's the new whipping boy?
Right. Because we know it's going to be now. I think Angel, I don't want to say brought it on himself, but he became more of a target due to his outspoken personality and his willingness to speak about this kind of stuff, and he was brash. I think if you had an umpire that was equally as talented, shall we say, as Angel Hernandez, and he just simply didn't talk, I wonder if the vitriol would be as bad because it would require the fans to be a lot more on top of it.
I got one for you. So if there is automatic balls and strikes, there is no Angel Hernandez.
That's also true.
I mean, so we wouldn't evaluate him, right? You would evaluate the umpires and other aspects of their
You're just never going to
performance.
hate them in the same way. They're just not going to be the same.
Yeah. By the way, and I was thinking this the other day, this is an aside, for another podcast, why is baseball the only sport in which the manager can go over and scream in the face of the official in a way that no other sport really exhibits? Have you ever seen a football coach do that? Maybe for a second.
I mean, I've seen basketball coaches do it for a little
screaming
bit.
at him for an extended period of time to the point where they kick dirt sometimes on the guy's
Right.
shoes. Why is baseball like that?
Is that he gets thrown out of the game.
Right.
And again, okay, you know what? We see it in basketball. We see the coaches intentionally take double technicals sometimes to essentially get themselves tossed. So I think it does happen occasionally, but I think it's just because we find it charming.
Right, because it used to be in tennis, right, back in the bad boy days with McEnroe screaming at umpires and having all those like uncomfortable situations where he would be speaking directly to the umpire and calling him, horrible things like pits of the world.
No, I think it's also because back in the day when there wasn't much, baseball was a much more of an entertainment product in some ways, just given the way stuff. Having the manager go out there and kick dirt on the umpire's shoes and throw a tantrum. That was good fun for the fans. I'm sure they enjoyed that.
It's a tradition in baseball. I'm not really sure why it's still
Right.
here, but anyway, I just something that crossed my mind when I was thinking about Angel Hernandez this week. Okay, so other news of the week. I noticed that the Tiger star Spencer Torkelson, who is not much of a star right now because he has really been playing poorly, is on the verge of being sent down to AAA for the second time in 2 years.
Right. I think they had him coming off the bench and pinch hitting.
Yeah, I think he lost his job in some ways to Gleyber Torres. Not Gleyber Torres. It's to the former Yankee Urshela, Gio Urshela. So yeah, that's surprising. And the Tigers' performance has been about the same. They've kind of like just been holding on to within shot of 500, but not much better.
Well, right,
than
they're
that.
a little bit below 500. The problem for them is that you've got, really what's been the best division in baseball in a lot of ways, with the Guardians, the Royals, and the Twins that have all been playing really, really well. I think the only other division that can really compare, at least on the totality of its strength, is the AL East.
Right, and that's because the top two teams are particularly good.
The Red Sox are now up to 30 wins. They're 30-29. Now, granted, they're not close to the Orioles or the Yankees, the same way the Twins are kind of there in the hunt with the Royals.
Right, and it would have been the Guardians. This is Sunday afternoon. We're recording, and the Guardians have already lost their game today. So I was about to say, had they won, they would have been one of 3 teams that were on a pace this year to win 110 games. Well, that's really special, and it's really easy to know like 110 games because if you win 2 out of 3 games, you win 108 games. So I always use that as my that's a special team
not
that
a lot
wins
of teams
108 games. Right. So and look, not likely the Dodgers are not one of those teams, by the way.
No.
So that's kind of interesting. It would be the Yankees and the Phillies as well as the Guardians, but they lost today, so they're going to win 107 right now if they keep it this. But that division, like you said, is among the stronger divisions so far, and I think the second place team is the one that you give better credit than do I, but the Royals continue to play really good baseball.
Well, we knew that they had a fantastic young player in Bobby Witt Jr., but I think what we didn't expect was Weiler Abreu coming out and putting together a Rookie of the Year campaign for them.
He's a Red Sox.
Oh, he's a Red Sox?
He's a Red Sox, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had him. I had him in my notes as a Royal. That was my mistake.
He's a Red Sox. No, Bobby Witt has been very very good this year, and the Royals have gotten an unbelievable year from Seth Lugo. I just can't believe that he's been able to do this for the entire season. And can he do it for the rest of the season? Well, every time that's a start.
Right, he's pitched really well. Now, they have to get a little bit of trouble because now Michael Wacha is going to be on the 15-day IL for a little bit. So that's going to hurt them. But their starting pitching has been extremely good. And as long as that holds, they're going to be a threat in that division because they're scoring. You know
who else is having a really good year for them? Salvador Perez.
Mm-hmm. He's a guy that quietly has put together a Hall of Fame type career.
Yeah, we've talked about him a few times, right? And so he needs to have this year and continue it through the rest of the year.
If they somehow make a miraculous
one more year like this, I think,
and a miraculous playoff run this year with him helming the team, that could mean a lot for him in terms of narrative legacy too.
I think Perez is 40 homers shy of 300 in his career. Catchers getting 300 home runs. That's going to be a real,
that's a pretty short
his
list.
Chance. Yeah, for him to make it there. So, you mentioned, and the Twins, by the way, who beat the Astros today, and the Astros have, we're doing a little better, and not so much. And this past week hasn't gone as well. The Twins, are just hanging around in there. They are the team that I still would look at if I were the Royals and even the Guardians going, we're going to have to keep our necks way ahead of these guys.
I think the only thing that I'm worried about with the Twins is that they don't score particularly well. They're for a team that's they're 6 games above or 7 games above 500, but they only have a +6 run differential. That typically, when you hang around like that, that means, you're probably a better than average team, but that could be a team that has a rough patch all of a sudden, and that could really hurt them at some point.
But you still play in the same division with the Chicago White Sox.
Right, who have lost 10 in a row.
So, you're going to get games against that team. That's certainly going to help your chances. But, of course, all the other teams in your division play them, too.
Mm-hmm.
and the Mariners in the West have kind of stretched it out to the largest lead. This was amazing to me. By June 1st since 2003, in over 20 years, which is a whopping 3.5 games, by the way.
I think that speaks to just more what the AL West has been than anything else.
But they are the only team in the American League West that is over 500. And the Rangers still are scuffling. They're within a game, and they play a game Sunday night, so maybe they'll get to that 500.
The Rangers very much feel like a team that's got a World Series hangover.
Yeah, and they're still waiting for, obviously, some of their reinforcements to come back in the name of Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer. And so you put those two guys in there, and all of a sudden your chances look a lot better, but they haven't hit as well. I think Evan Carter has not had quite the year that I was hoping for since I picked him for Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, it's not looking so hot.
So, but they're good, and I think that they will be there, and I think the Astros will be there at the end as well. They're still yet to be heard from. The Yankees and the Orioles, and the Orioles, are tied in the loss column with the Yankees in the American League East. But both of those teams have a 10-game lead over the Red Sox, who you've already talked about. Mm-hmm. So I think, like I said last week, the Red Sox, the Rays, the Blue Jays, throw them in a pile. I think the Red Sox, will falter, in the long run, but they have surprised me even last year, and probably that's why I think that any three of those teams, one of those three teams could do something, and maybe pressure the Yankees or the Orioles.
Right. I mean, you got to hope that you get some kind of pressure going on here, because I don't want to get into a world where, because it's June.
Right. To say the playoffs are already set.
Right. Exactly. Because it's June, and this is really the last point that your team has to kind of okay, if you haven't made your run yet, you got to start now, because this is sort of the last month that you can start a month where things aren't going so hot and you've still got some time to turn it around. If you get to July 1st and you still haven't turned things around, you're not turning them around.
But it's obviously, like you say, it's too early to talk about things like, well, there are this many games out. I don't want to have wild card games behind discussions at this point.
Let's put it this way. You might not be a seller as of today. It's June 2nd right now. You might be a seller by June 30th. And that where you are in your season could be very different. So if you like how your team is currently composed, you kind of got to root for them to play well over these next couple of weeks. Otherwise, they might look drastically different come the trading deadline.
And the Phillies they're just remarkable in what they're doing. I mean, in every single way they are. And that still they've only got a 6-game lead in that loss column over the Braves, who haven't played as well recently, and they're 4-6 in their last 10. And the Phillies this week will have a weird week, as will the Mets, because the two teams will fly to London later in the week and play 2 games in London, Saturday and Sunday. So two games off Thursdays and Friday for those guys, and as they travel, and then they get the Monday off. So you can kind of get your pitching a little more rested, if you're going to try to take advantage of what is a bizarre sort of situation when you're playing games and having days off in front of them. It's almost like a little mini All-Star break in a way.
Yeah, it kind of gives you that time to rest and kind of at least get your guys a couple, because that's so important, especially for your rotation, to get those extra days off sometimes. That can avoid you having to use a 6th starter.
And I read something this week. I don't know if you've read this story about the infielder David Fletcher, who is up right now under investigation as part of the Ohtani thing, because he apparently placed bets with the same bookie. So he's sort of on the suspended, but he's pitching in the minor leagues
as
an infielder. As a knuckleballer, and he's actually doing it pretty effectively at this point. And so I don't know why the Braves said, sure, you want to be a knuckleballer? Go ahead.
Hey, you know what? If you can get guys out, you're not going to stop them.
And it's always fun when you've got a knuckleballer, right? Because there's another one in the
you don't get many of them in the major leagues.
I think we've got a couple right now. At least, well, again, Fletcher's not in the majors, so
I don't know if we have. Do we have any in the majors?
There's another knuckleballer, and I'm really mad at myself for not remembering. There is a guy who's pitching right now, and doing okay with a knuckleball. And we won't talk much about the Mets because they're not a good team.
Nothing enjoyable to talk about.
But they did have a couple of unusual things happen this week, and the first unusual thing was the Jorge Lopez meltdown when he blew the game for the Mets as a reliever this week and got so upset that he flung his glove into the stands, and then basically was accused of saying something that he denied later, saying that the Mets are the worst team in Major League Baseball, saying that no what I meant to say.
As I'm the worst teammate.
I'm the worst teammate in Major League Baseball. And the Mets said, yeah.
Either way, we don't want you
You're
around
gone.
anymore.
And they DFA'd him. And then I heard some really, difficult stuff about the guy having some personal issues with his son. And then you start thinking, wow, I feel for this guy, because if it was born out of his frustration with things that are happening off the field, and he obviously pitched poorly, and all that came to a head, and he did something stupid, and he apologized, you kind of feel like, wow, I don't like to see things like that happen, because there were extenuating circumstances.
Right, you don't like seeing a guy, have a bad situation, because...
So I don't know that he'll come back to the Mets, and chances are, for the way things go for the Mets, that he will sign with the Braves or the Phillies.
And he'll pitch one good inning.
Nobody will get a hit off him the rest of the season.
No, he'll just pitch one good inning against the Mets, and then they'll cut him.
So
we'll DFA him too.
But on the positive side for the Mets, and there's not much positive to talk about, because they blew another game today on Sunday where they had the lead in the ninth inning, and for the sixth time since early May, they blew a game that they had the lead in the ninth inning.
The lead after 8.
Lead after 8. I'm sorry. Yeah, right. Well, in anything, and so no other major league team has more than 2 blown games after
in that same time period.
In that same time frame. So if the Met fans feel like the sky is falling, there's a reason.
There's a reason why it feels absolutely terrible.
But the sky wasn't falling yesterday. It was a gorgeous day at Citi Field when they retired Darryl Strawberry's number 18, and that was a great ceremony. And it's so great to have both Darryl and Doc, his teammate, have their numbers retired, because it's the right thing.
Right, it sort of felt like a bright spot in what's been like an otherwise pretty dark Met season so far, and sort of and I think it's something that maybe fans of other teams can't kind of appreciate why it means so much to Met fans that we finally got Dwight and Darryl's numbers.
Well, I guess all teams would know. They must have guys like that, right?
But very few teams have guys that are basically not getting their numbers retired because the ownership didn't want to do it.
That's a good point, actually. I didn't think of it that way. Yeah, I think it's so long overdue that you can look around the organization and go, are there any other guys who
because that was why the Wilpons, for what I don't personally know the reason why the Wilpons didn't want to retire Dwight and Doc's number. I don't know if it was ever publicly stated.
They just kind of pulled away from the organization, both of them, and then both of them, when they came back, have said sort of the same things, going, I wish I'd never left, I'm a Met forever,
So they've come back and they've said all the right stuff. So I'm really glad that Cohen was able to go ahead and kind of get this done, because one of the biggest criticisms, especially of the Wilpons when they built Citi Field, is it wasn't so much about the Mets. You've got this giant rotunda that's a
homage to the Dodgers.
The Dodgers, right. It's the Jackie Robinson rotunda, who never played for the Mets as far as I'm aware. So it was something that was, and then you had a lot of Mets who were very big parts of the organization whose numbers weren't retired. So I know for a lot of Met fans, retiring Darryl's number, retiring Dwight's number this year, is correcting a mistake of the past.
There is no question.
Hopefully the team can finally kind of move forward from
No
this.
question that Steve Cohen really does a good job as owner of bringing the Mets back together and making it seem more like a family than it has in a long time. The play in the field leaves a lot to be desired, obviously, and then hopefully, this was not going to be the season, and the Mets are making us sure of that a lot sooner than we'd like.
And it's kind of interesting because in a year where, across town, in here in New York, in a year where extra bases and hits are down, slugging percentage is down, Aaron Judge put together what might be the most impressive May that we've ever seen out of just about anybody over the course of,
I think that's the greatest May for any Yankee in the history of the franchise.
1,500 OPS. He had 15 home runs. I mean, just an absolute unbelievable streak for him. And now you really have that lineup with that two-headed monster in the middle, with Judge and Soto. And
you could throw Stanton in there, too. It could be a three-headed monster, if you ask me.
Right, but when those two are hitting well, it becomes a nightmare. And I think Soto just became he just passed people in terms of all-time career walks, and he's 25.
Yeah. Well, in percentage, I think, not in all-time career walks. And the Yankees will be later this week entertaining the Dodgers coming to Yankee Stadium after the Twins come. So the Yankees have a couple of good teams coming in to play them upcoming this week. And I, for one, will be very interested to watch the Dodger-Yankee series at Yankee Stadium. And the Dodgers, they are 14 games over 500, not playing great. They're 4-6 in their last 10. But, I don't know if any of the other teams has got what it takes to really push them.
Not right. None of those teams look like it.
I don't think so.
The most you can hope is maybe the Giants are able to, just
I would pick the Padres as the
pull
team
some
if I had to.
But I feel like it's going to take the kind of weird, like, Giants 2010, 12, and 14 magic kind of all of a sudden to figure it out and get unbelievably hot for no reason.
Meanwhile, in the Central Division, the team that I love to ignore and shake my head at has got a 7-game lead in the loss column. The Brewers leading the Cubs. I keep saying the Cubs are going to be the team to do this, and the Brewers are a paper tiger. You know what? The longer this goes on, the more you start to think that this team is, maybe got what it takes. And I just didn't think they had the pitching and the hitting to do it.
And you know what? If you're a Met fan, all you can do is look at that and think, I can't wait for David Stearns to build that here.
Yeah, right. The Brewers have, hit much better than teams thought. Contreras has been really good.
And I do also want to point out that because it's interesting, we got so down on teams in the course of what happens over a month. But then you can look at a team like the Colorado Rockies, who I think went 15 and 14 in the month of May. They actually had a winning record.
Wow.
In the month of May.
We don't even hear about that.
And you don't even hear about that. So it can look...
Because they're still 15 games under 500.
Right, they're still doing terrible because of how bad they were to start the season.
Right.
But they've been playing at least watchable baseball. And as a fans of a team that's playing, not watchable baseball a lot of the time, it's such a difference in how your team loses. Like the Mets, I think part of the reason why they felt so absolutely awful to watch is because they've blown all their leads. You can watch a young, plucky team that can hit a little bit, but, like sometimes they're going to have a game where their starting pitcher just yaks it up. Or their bullpen blows a lot of leads. But at least in individual games and moments, there's going to be performances and moments to be excited about. I think that's how a team like the Nationals can be a lot more of an exciting a team because you're watching these young players. And sure, every game might not be good, but some games are. But when you watch a team like the Mets, that's the oldest team in baseball.
Perfect. Yep.
When they stink, you're not excited. Like,
you don't have much to hope for.
You're not sitting there going, "Oh man, I'm really excited. Maybe next time Jose Quintana will come out and really have figured it out." Like, no, this is what he is.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point that the Nationals are young and feel like they're coming. Their Mets are old and seem like they're fading.
Right.
So
so that's why you have a team like the Cardinals who have played much better, who have now climbed all the way up to just being a shade under 500. They're right behind the Cubs. But they're an old team, and you have to think like, oh, no, what if they start going the other direction? They've played well to get here, but like we see in basketball sometimes, it can be you spend so long trying to get back to 500, and you fight so hard trying to tie the game, and then you can just never quite get over that hill. You can never quite even the score. You can never quite get to 500, and then you go on the slide again, and you're like, but just a week we were 2 games under 500. We're 7 games under 500. What happened? It can go like that in baseball sometimes.
Yeah. I think that's a really good analogy to say that just trying to get to 500 isn't enough. You're not going to you got to do better than that. And
but you got to get over 500 so that
when you start poorly like the Astros did, right? And you're trying to get back to 500. Like, okay, we get it to 500. No, you need to keep going.
Right, exactly. The Astros are working so hard to try and get back to 500. So, they have to play great baseball, and then they can never have a period again this season where they don't play great baseball. That's the other thing.
That's a good point, too.
Is that not only do you have to be consistently good, you also can't have any streak of bad play, because if the Astros suddenly lost, 7 in a row, what are you going to do?
Right.
You're done at that point.
Well, the only thing that happens sometimes is you got a team that hits the All-Star break and then goes 25 games over 500 for the rest of the season. Like they caught their stride, and you're going to have to catch something like that. But if you're already 15 games under 500, that means you're only winning 85 games or something like that. 84 games, you may not make the playoffs.
You're hoping to steal a wild card spot at that point. And now that could be the type of team that, they're the third wild card, but everybody's like, yeah, but they're playing way better than a third wild card. And with expanded playoffs, that can be the kind of team that can get into the playoffs and suddenly go on a run and have an unbelievable streak.
We pulled a stat this week, and we've talked a lot about in our podcasts how the hitting is down in general, and the shift didn't work. And some stuff came out this week, and Joe Posnanski wrote about it in his blog about
expected
batting average versus actual batting average, right? So you can calculate what you expect based upon the factors of the velocity of the hit, where it was hit, and so on and so forth. What the expected batting average on a batted ball in play would be, and normally actual batting average is better than expected batting average for Major League Baseball. I didn't even know this actually. I didn't know that.
Which makes sense because normally you're going to have over the whole league, you would want the batters on average be getting a little bit luckier than they should be.
So and Joe put up a chart saying from 2016 through 2023, only 2 years, 2020, the strike season, and 2023, were they the same. Other than that, the expected batting average was worse than the actual batting average.
So generally, the players are always a little bit slightly luckier, or balls fall in, or guys don't make plays.
Until this year.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're already down 7 points. So expecting batting average is 247, and the actual Major League batting average last week was 240. 240 is bad.
Right, especially because in 2016, the league average was 255, so it's fallen 15 points in just 8 seasons. Which is why hitting on offense feels so awful this year. But 7 points is a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And, it's only half a season, or not even, a third of a season.
Guys could just be getting really unlucky to start this.
But still, it's hard to see why.
Right. Are guys just playing that much of better defense that we've just had a suite of unbelievable plays in this first half that's robbed guys of hits? I know that expecting batting average is a little bit off of how hard the ball is hit and stuff, so that you look at guys like Lindor and Brandon Nimmo, who we've watched on the Mets, who have hit a zillion balls just on the laces that are just scorched right at somebody who just catches it. That ball probably has a pretty high expecting batting average because normally balls hit in that area of the field.
But they're outs.
Or hits, but in the Mets' case, they're outs.
So it makes you wonder, okay, is it the ball? And we'll talk about that in a second, because when you go to slugging percentages.
Right, and this is why people think the ball in Major League Baseball might have messed with the ball a little bit.
Slugging percentage is even more so, right? So that your expected slugging percentage is always lower than the actual. It was 417 to 406 in 2016, and every year since that and through last year, it was only 0.001 better last year, 414 to 413. But at least the actual was better than the expected until this year.
Right, this year, and this is what's wild, is this year you're down by 0.019.
19 points. That's not a little. That's bigger than any other year, by the way.
Right. This is
and it's negative. It went the other way.
You're right. This is easily the biggest and most shift in any direction, and for it to swing this much, 20 points over the course of a single season, when before the most it's ever moved is 8, is really wild to think about.
The expected slugging percentage is 406, which would be among the worst. There was a 388 year in 2022, but the actual slugging percentage is 387, which is the lowest in recent memory.
And it's going to be interesting to see. We expect this to likely level out some over the course of the rest
when
of
the weather
season.
Warms up and the ball. I mean, we always say that about baseball.
But I have no idea how true that actually is.
I'm not sure I'm buying that. And so it makes you wonder about the baseball, and we can cast aspersions all we want, and we don't really know. But there are people that are saying that the ball isn't flying as far, that there are some statistics that you can get off Fangraphs that shows that balls are landing on the warning track or short of the warning track where they were getting deeper in the past. So
I mean, but it feels like every time that the offense is down, we immediately start going to, Major League Baseball did something to the balls. They're messing with stuff.
And I just don't understand why Major League Baseball would allow that to happen on their watch. And maybe it's just not as controllable.
Here's the thing. One, because the conspiracy theory is they're not allowing any of this to happen. They're directing these changes to the ball. So that's why if it's happening.
That's what I'm saying, allowing it to be so variant, going like guys, why can't we just have a baseball that 1 year to the next is kind of the same?
Because
what's so hard about
that? If you want to manipulate the ball and therefore situations, you would change things.
I guess so. You'll never get them to admit it, right? Obviously.
Right. And that's why it's a conspiracy theory.
So, and that's funny you should say that conspiracy theory, because the biggest story, I said there was another biggest story, and we're going to talk about in our podcast this week. We're going to do a podcast talking about the length of seasons changing, maybe, because I wrote something about that, and then hooking that to all the Negro League stats now are included by Major League Baseball. They had been included into some of the other platforms like Baseball Reference.
Now they're included, and you will see stats from Josh Gibson listed in the same area right next to Babe Ruth.
He's got the highest batting average of all time. So my whole thing about Ty Cobb, and I had this thing about Ty Cobb when I grew up, hit 367 for his career. I remember as a kid, it's like that's a number you remember. Except that now he hit 366, and he had to go back and kind of figure out that, okay, because in a few games they credited him with the wrong hits, and so they had to go back and correct that.
Things.
And so then he lost a point in his batting average. Well, now no one will have to talk about that anymore because Josh Gibson has the all-time greatest batting average. But I think it's a great thing. We'll talk about that in our podcast. And it was the biggest story in Major League Baseball last week.